Have you ever walked away from a conversation with a strange feeling in your gut? Like something wasn't said, but it was? You replay the words, you analyze the tone, but the truth remains buried somewhere between the lines. It happens more often than we admit. And the older we get, the more we crave clarity. Not drama, not guessing games, just honest, real connection. But the world doesn't make it easy. People wear masks. Conversations become performances. And sometimes you walk away wondering, did they mean that? Or was there something else? Here's a quiet truth. We're not mind readers, but we can learn to listen with more than our ears, to see with more than our eyes, to feel with more than emotion. And the ancient Stoics knew this long before we did. They didn't teach mind tricks. They taught awareness. They taught discipline, not just of action, but of perception. And when we sharpen our perception, we start to see the world, not as it pretends to be, but as it actually is. That moment when someone says, "I'm fine," but their hands tremble just slightly, when their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes, when the rhythm of their voice stumbles in the middle of confidence. These are not coincidences. These are signals, and once you learn to read them, not with judgment, but with grounded calm, you unlock a deeper understanding of others, of yourself, and of the space between. This is not about control. This is not about calling people out or playing detective. This is about showing up, present, clear-minded, and real. Because in a world that speaks in riddles, clarity is a quiet revolution. In this video, we'll break down how you can start to hear the things left unsaid, see the intentions behind the gestures, and build a new kind of connection, rooted not in guessing, but in truth. And the best part? You don't need a degree in psychology. You just need attention, intention, and the willingness to see what's always been there. Let's begin. We live in a world obsessed with words, texts, emails, polished phrases, perfectly timed replies. But sometimes, it's not the words that matter. It's the silence between them. The way someone leans back instead of leaning in. The way their fingers tighten when they say, "I'm not upset." Body language is like a second voice, one that never lies, and yet we miss it. Not because it's hidden, but because we rarely slow down enough to notice. I remember sitting across from a friend one afternoon. We hadn't seen each other in a while. She smiled and said everything was great, but her hands kept rubbing the napkin in her lap. Her foot tapped anxiously beneath the table. Her eyes flicked toward the door more than once. She didn't need to say she was overwhelmed. Her body already had. The Stoics taught us not just to act with virtue, but to observe with clarity, to let the world show itself before we decide what it means. And in body language, that clarity begins with small things. A person nods when you speak. It looks like agreement. But if their shoulders sag and their jaw tightens, maybe they're agreeing out of fear, not belief. You walk into a room, greet a colleague. They smile politely, but their hands stay rigid at their sides and they keep shifting their weight. That's not confidence. That's discomfort dressed up in manners. Body language doesn't speak in paragraphs. It speaks in pulses, in tension, in posture. And to understand it, you have to widen your lens. Don't zoom in on one gesture. Zoom out. Watch how things connect. Eyes, voice, movement. A firm handshake can feel strong until you notice the shoulders stiffen and the smile is a little too sharp. Once, during a negotiation, the man across from me said all the right things. He agreed with my proposal. His tone was smooth, but I noticed something. His feet kept shifting, subtly, pointing toward the exit. I paused, asked a few more questions. It turned out he wasn't really on board, and walking away from that deal saved me a lot of trouble. Here's the key. Don't interpret body language with suspicion. Interpret it with calm curiosity. Ask yourself, why might they be acting this way? What emotions could be underneath? Most people aren't trying to lie, they're just trying to manage their own fears. And sometimes, their body speaks those fears louder than their voice ever could. When you start paying attention, not just to what people say, but how they say it, you'll see things you used to miss. Moments where you can offer comfort, opportunities to connect more deeply, times when silence is more honest than speech. The Stoics called this seeing things as they are, not as we want them to be. And body language? It's one of the most honest truths we have access to, if we're willing to look. So the next time you're in conversation, don't just hear the words. Watch the story their body is telling. It might just change how you see everything. Sometimes the truth slips out faster than we can hide it. Not in full sentences, not in confessions, but in moments. Tiny, flickering, almost invisible. A quick eyebrow twitch, a brief lip curl, a blink that lingers just a beat too long. These are micro-expressions, your emotional reflexes. They show up before your brain has time to build the mask. And once you learn to notice them, you'll start to realize that people say more in 1 second of expression than in 5 minutes of talking. It's like catching lightning in your periphery. It's gone before you're even sure it was there. But if you're paying attention, it's enough. I once shared an idea with someone I trusted. They smiled and nodded, said it was great. But just before that smile, there was a flicker, barely a second, of tightened lips, a furrowed brow. That moment told me everything. They weren't convinced, and if I hadn't caught that brief signal, I would have kept pushing in a direction that lacked real support. Micro-expressions are honest because they are involuntary. They're like your emotions peeking out before your ego has a chance to slam the door. The Stoics believed in knowing the self deeply. And part of that is recognizing what we express, often without knowing. If we learn to see that in others, we connect with them beneath their defenses. But it's not magic. It's attention. You don't need a psychology degree. You need patience. You need presence. And you need to look, not just once, but repeatedly. Watch the eyes. They flash the truth, fear, doubt, surprise, contempt. Most people don't hold those expressions long. But in that sliver of time, they show you the world they're hiding inside. A smile that fades too fast. Eyes that widen slightly, but the voice doesn't change. Tight jaws paired with calm words. Truth and performance side by side. And here's something crucial. Don't isolate the expression. Context matters. Did the flicker of worry come after you mentioned a deadline? Did the tension show up after a compliment? The meaning lives in the moment around the micro-expression, not just in the face. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but the Stoic path is to observe without ego. Notice the signal. Ask yourself what it might reveal. Then keep listening. Once, during a presentation, I noticed someone in the audience nodding. They looked engaged, but their lips twitched just briefly, and their eyes didn't quite match their body. Later, when I asked for feedback, they hesitated, then admitted they had serious concerns. Because I'd noticed that brief flicker, I was ready to listen deeper, and that changed the outcome entirely. Micro-expressions don't scream, they whisper, and only people who truly care enough to listen hear them. So slow down. Let yourself observe, moment by moment, not to catch someone lying, but to catch the truth when it's brave enough to show its face, even for a fraction of a second. Listening isn't waiting for your turn to speak. It's not nodding while your mind drifts somewhere else. And it's not just about hearing words. It's about catching the spaces between them, the weight of a pause, the tremor in a voice, the rhythm that breaks in the middle of a sentence. Real listening, active listening, is a kind of presence. It's a gift you give someone when you're no longer thinking about what you'll say next, but fully tuned in to what they're trying to express, even when they're not sure how to say it. We often think communication is about talking well, but the truth is, connection lives in the listening. I remember a time I sat across from a friend. We hadn't talked in weeks. He was telling me about his new job, said all the right things. Promotion, better pay, exciting team. But every sentence came with a pause at the end. His smile was slightly delayed, like his face had to catch up to his voice. And at one point he said, "It's good. Yeah, I guess." That "I guess" held more truth than the rest of the conversation. When you listen actively, you start to hear what people really mean. Not just a polished version, not just the surface, but the emotion, raw, uncertain, real. And to do that, you have to create space, turn off distractions, close your laptop, put your phone face down, and be there with your full attention, not half of it. Look them in the eye, but gently. Listen for what they're not saying. Someone might be talking about work stress, but never mention their team. That silence could mean something. It could be the sound of tension they're too polite or too scared to express. And sometimes people don't need answers, they just need to feel heard. The Stoics taught us to be steady, not just in our own emotions, but in how we hold space for others. To listen without judgment, to let someone speak and trust that we won't try to fix them. Only understand them. I had a friend once who said they were fine, over and over, but every time they said it, they avoided eye contact and sighed so softly it almost didn't register. I paused, and instead of asking again, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm here, when you're ready." 10 minutes later, the truth poured out, not because I pushed, but because I waited. Active listening isn't passive. It's not sitting quietly. It's an intentional act of presence, like holding a mirror for someone, not to reflect how they look, but how they feel inside, maybe for the first time. And here's something most people forget. When you truly listen, people start to hear themselves more clearly. They process, they discover, they understand. Because your stillness gives their truth room to unfold. So don't rush. Don't assume. Don't prepare your answer while they're still talking. Sit in the silence. Let it stretch. Let it speak. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. You can hear the exact same words from two different people, and they'll mean two completely different things. Not because of the voice or the tone, but because of the context wrapped around them. Context is the silent frame that gives shape to everything we experience. Without it, we misread moments, we misjudge people, and we draw conclusions that don't hold up when we step back. Imagine someone walks past you without saying hello. On another day, you might think, "They're mad at me." But what if they just lost someone they love? What if they're deep in thought, trying to hold themselves together? We take things personally, Not because people are always unkind, but because we forget to ask, what else might be going on here? The Stoics were clear about this. They believed our interpretations, not the events themselves, cause most of our suffering. And when it comes to reading others, that principle holds true. You see someone acting cold, abrupt, distant. Your ego says, they don't like me. But maybe they're just tired. Maybe they just got news they're still trying to process. Or maybe it has nothing to do with you at all. I remember once arriving at a meeting expecting collaboration. But my colleague was short, clipped, distracted. I almost reacted, almost let frustration take the wheel. But then I learned. Just an hour earlier, they'd received news of a health scare in their family. It changed everything. My frustration melted into compassion because I stopped seeing the moment as mine and started seeing it as theirs. Context invites us to zoom out, to trade judgment for understanding. You might hear someone say, I'm fine in a party full of joy, and believe them. But if they say the same words with lowered eyes, hunched shoulders, in the middle of a tense conversation, you know better. Same sentence, different truth. Because context redefines meaning. But here's the challenge. Context isn't always given. You have to look for it. In someone's energy, in their recent experiences, in the emotional residue they carry into the room. And often it takes patience to see what isn't being said. Once at a family gathering, I saw someone sitting quietly, withdrawn. People assumed he was being rude or uninterested, but I waited, listened, and later discovered he was silently dealing with the fallout of losing his job. He wasn't avoiding connection. He was carrying the weight of something too raw to speak about. When you understand context, you don't just decode people more accurately. You become safer to be around because you're not reacting to the surface. You're respecting the story underneath, and that's what connection is made of. So next time someone's energy feels off, pause. Ask yourself, what might I be missing here? What storm could they be weathering silently? You won't always get the answer, but the simple act of wondering, of not assuming, creates space for grace. The Stoics taught us that much of life is outside our control, but interpretation, that's ours to shape. Interpret with humility, react with wisdom, and remember, people are fighting battles you cannot see. Some conversations end before they even begin. Not because people don't care, but because the questions we ask don't open any doors. Yes or no, fine or not fine, good day or bad. These answers live on the surface, but people live much deeper. If you want to understand someone, you have to invite them somewhere they don't usually go. And that begins with how you ask. Open-ended questions are more than conversation tools. They're acts of trust. They tell the other person, I'm not here for a quick answer. I'm here for your truth. But here's what many people miss. These questions don't always make things comfortable. In fact, they often do the opposite. Because when you ask someone, what's weighing on you lately? Or, how has that really felt for you? You're not just requesting words. You're asking for a piece of their world. And not everyone is ready to hand that over, especially if they don't feel safe. Especially if they've spent years being dismissed or misunderstood. I remember once, a close friend was going through a rough patch. I kept asking the usual, are you okay? Do you want to talk? And they kept saying no, politely, quietly, until I changed the question. I asked, what's the hardest part for you right now? And everything shifted, not instantly, but enough to crack something open, enough for them to breathe and begin. The right question isn't about what you want to know. It's about what they might need to say. And sometimes they don't even realize it until you ask. But asking isn't enough. You also have to stay present, stay patient, stay with the silence that follows. Because silence, after a deep question, isn't rejection. It's someone stepping into a room they haven't entered in a while, and once they start to speak, don't interrupt. Don't finish their thoughts. Don't fix. Just be the ground they stand on while they untangle what's inside. I've made this mistake before. I once asked someone, "What inspires you the most?" They smiled, started sharing something tender, and my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. They went silent, shut down, and that door closed. I didn't just lose the moment, I lost their trust. That day taught me, if you're going to ask something real, you better be ready to hold the answer like it matters, because it does. And don't think open-ended questions are only for heavy topics. Sometimes they bring out laughter, honesty, joy. I once asked my nephew, "What's the best part about being a kid?" I expected cartoons, candy. He said, "No taxes," and we laughed for 5 minutes. But it also reminded me, when you leave the door wide open, you never know what beautiful truth might walk through. So instead of asking, "Did you have a good day?" try, "What made today meaningful for you?" Instead of, "Are you happy?" try, "What does happiness feel like for you right now?" These questions tell people, I see you as a whole human, not a checkbox, not a report. But be warned, once you open that door, you have to walk through it with them, with attention, with care. The Stoics didn't waste words. They knew the power of the right question, asked with stillness, received with presence. So next time you sit with someone, don't fish for answers. Invite a conversation that breathes, and when it comes, listen with everything you've got. Empathy isn't about having the answers. It's about showing up anyway. It's sitting beside someone when you don't know what to say. It's hearing pain you can't fix and still choosing to stay in the room with it. Empathy isn't a technique. It's a posture, a quiet willingness to enter someone's world. Not to rearrange it, but to witness it. I used to think empathy was about knowing what to say, comforting phrases, helpful advice, encouragement. But when someone's heart is breaking, those things often fall flat. A friend of mine lost someone close, and I did what most people do. I tried to say the right things. Time heals. They're in a better place. You're strong. You'll get through this. None of it landed. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't what they needed. One day, I stopped talking. I just sat with them, listened, and finally said, "I can't fully understand your pain, but I want to know what it feels like for you." That changed everything. Not instantly, but they softened. They shared. And I realized empathy isn't about speaking into someone's pain. It's about making space for it to exist safely. The Stoics taught acceptance, not to ignore emotion, but to understand that some things aren't meant to be solved. Some things are simply meant to be held. When you lead with empathy, you stop needing people to hurry up and feel better. You stop trying to fix what isn't yours to fix. You just listen. And in doing so, you become someone people trust. Because they know when things fall apart, you won't run. You won't minimize. You'll stand there with them in the rubble. Empathy also gives us a deeper understanding of why people act the way they do. The friend who snaps may be carrying invisible grief. The colleague who avoids connection might be overwhelmed by private pressure. We often mislabel people as cold or rude, when really they're scared or hurting. But you won't see that unless you slow down long enough to care. I've made the mistake of rushing judgment. I've rolled my eyes, dismissed someone's silence as arrogance, only to later discover they were walking through hell. Empathy asks us to wait before labeling, to wonder instead of assume. And sometimes it starts with a simple shift in questions. Not, what's wrong with them, but, what might they be carrying today? Empathy also requires boundaries. It's not about absorbing every emotion around you. It's about staying rooted while offering shelter. Like a tree in a storm, you don't stop the rain, but you give someone a place to stand. And yes, empathy is vulnerable, because when you truly feel with someone, you open yourself too. But that's the beauty of it. Empathy connects us beyond words, beyond differences, beyond performance. It reminds us that at our core, we're all just humans, trying to be seen, trying to be heard, trying to heal. So the next time someone's emotion feels messy, heavy, raw, don't back away. Stay, breathe. Be the one who doesn't flinch. Not because you have the answers, but because you care enough to witness the truth with them. There's something quietly powerful about people who are consistent. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. Their words and their actions move in the same direction, and over time, that alignment builds trust, deep trust, because anyone can say the right thing, in the moment, under pressure, with an audience. But not everyone lives that truth when no one's watching. Consistency is one of the clearest signs of someone's real values, and it's one of the easiest things to overlook if we're only listening to what's being said. I once worked with someone who always said, "I'm here for the team." They spoke the language of support, of reliability, but when crunch time came, they disappeared, made excuses, let others carry the weight. It wasn't dramatic, but it was revealing. Their actions exposed something their words never would have. The Stoics had a word for this: integrity. To them, it wasn't about perfection. It was about harmony between what you believe, what you say, and what you do. And once you start watching for consistency in others, you begin to see patterns. Does the person who claims to value honesty also own up to their mistakes? Or just talk about truth when it's easy? Does the friend who always says, "I'm here if you need me," actually show up, even when it's inconvenient? We're not looking for saints. We're looking for sincerity. And sincerity lives in repetition. It shows up quietly over time. I've learned to pay close attention to small moments. Someone comforting you when you're upset is nice, but someone who checks in 3 days later to see how you're holding up, that's consistency. That's care turned into action. A coworker who compliments your work in public but undermines you in private, that's not inconsistency by accident. It's strategy, and it should raise questions. When words and actions don't match, don't explain it away. Don't fill the gap with benefit of the doubt forever. Just observe, with clarity, with calm. And remember, you don't need to call it out. You don't need to confront everyone. But you do need to notice. Because noticing helps you decide who to trust and who to hold at a distance. The Stoic approach is this: be slow to form judgments, but once formed through experience, let them guide you with wisdom. If someone says they value kindness but consistently speaks with cruelty, believe the consistency, not the slogan. And this works in reverse too. If someone struggles with words but always shows up, always makes time, always follows through, They may be more trustworthy than someone with perfect phrasing but no follow-through. So watch what people do, especially when there's nothing to gain, especially when no one is looking, especially when things get hard. That's when character becomes visible. And as you practice this, turn the lens inward too. Are your actions consistent with your words? Are your promises supported by behavior? We all slip. We all contradict ourselves at times, but the goal isn't perfection. It's awareness, it's effort, it's realignment. Consistency builds the foundation of trust, brick by brick, choice by choice. And once it's built, it becomes something rare. A relationship you don't have to second guess. Emotional intelligence isn't about being soft. It's about being strong enough to stay present. When emotions run high, when tension fills the room, when someone's voice cracks halfway through a sentence and you resist the urge to fix, explain, or escape. It's the ability to feel without becoming overwhelmed, to care without collapsing, to notice not just what's being said, but what's not. It's not dramatic. It doesn't need to be. Emotional intelligence works in quiet ways. A glance that lingers a second too long, a tone that changes mid-story, a confident posture that suddenly folds. Most people miss these things, not because they don't care, but because they've never been taught how to notice. The Stoics didn't suppress emotion. They studied it. They understood that by observing emotion, not reacting to it impulsively, we become wiser, more grounded, less likely to cause harm. I once had a friend who always seemed upbeat, always smiling, always saying, "It's all good." But during one conversation, I noticed her hands trembled just slightly, and when she laughed, her eyes didn't join in. So I asked, "What's weighing on you these days?" At first, silence. Then, she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. And out came a story of burnout, pressure, and loneliness she hadn't shared with anyone. That's what emotional intelligence makes possible. Not just better relationships, but safer ones. Ones where people feel like they can exhale around you. And it starts with two things: self-awareness and empathy. Self-awareness means you're not just reading others, you're reading yourself. You catch the tightness in your jaw. You feel the edge in your tone. You notice when you're reacting from ego instead of care. And instead of pushing it down or blaming others, you pause. You breathe. You choose differently. I've been in situations where someone said something that hit a nerve. Old me would have fired back. But emotional intelligence taught me to ask myself, is this about them? Or is this a wound I haven't looked at yet? And that shift changes everything. It gives you power back. Not the kind that controls others, but the kind that gives you control over your response. Empathy, on the other hand, means you're not scanning for flaws. You're tuning into feelings. You're not looking to diagnose. You're listening to understand. I once worked with a team where someone always seemed withdrawn. People labeled him antisocial. But one day, I stayed behind after a meeting and asked, "How are you really holding up lately?" He paused, then shared that he'd been caring for a sick parent every night, running on 2 hours of sleep, barely keeping it together. That moment changed how the whole team saw him. But it never would have happened without emotional awareness, the courage to ask, and the patience to stay. Developing emotional intelligence doesn't mean you become a therapist. It means you become human, in a deeper, more intentional way. You catch what's beneath the surface. You pause before reacting. You speak with more care. You connect with more depth. And when people sense that in you, They feel safer. They feel understood. They open up. The Stoics called this clarity of mind, not just intellectual clarity, but emotional clarity too, to respond with steadiness, to witness with humility, to engage without control. Because here's the truth. No one thinks clearly when emotions are storming. But if you can be the calm in that storm, you'll help others find clarity too. So practice. Every day. When things are easy, and especially when they're not. Emotional intelligence is not talent. It's a daily choice to stay aware, to stay open, to stay human. We live in a world addicted to speed. Fast answers, instant replies, immediate results. But the most important parts of life, healing, trust, growth, they don't rush. They move at the speed of patience. And most people don't know how to sit with that. We're uncomfortable with silence. We fidget when someone doesn't respond right away. We assume disinterest or rejection or that something's wrong. But often, they're just not ready. And our impatience becomes another barrier between us. Patience is not passive. It's active waiting. It's the choice to be present even when there's nothing happening yet. It's understanding that someone's truth may need time to surface. I remember being at a family gathering, and one of my relatives sat quietly, arms folded, barely speaking. At first, I thought they were upset, maybe with me. I nearly asked, "What's wrong?" But something stopped me. Instead, I just sat beside them. Didn't press. Didn't fill the space. Just offered presence. Minutes passed. Then quietly, they began to talk. About work pressure, about feeling isolated, about trying to hold it all together. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't immediate. But it was real. And it only happened because I didn't rush the moment. The Stoics talked about controlling what's within us. And impatience. That's often our own discomfort trying to escape silence. But silence isn't a threat. It's a doorway. If we can stop filling it with noise, we give others the space to step through it in their own time. Patience in relationships means letting people open up when they're ready, not when we want them to. It means not misinterpreting slow replies as indifference, not seeing quietness as rejection, but recognizing that people process at different speeds, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. I've learned this lesson the hard way. I used to push for answers. I needed clarity fast, and in doing so, I shut people down, made them feel pressured, unsafe. Now, when someone pulls away, I don't chase. I stay close enough to be felt, but far enough to give them room. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is wait. Wait without demanding. Wait without assuming. Wait without needing to be the center of their experience. Patience also matters with ourselves. There are days when we don't know what we feel, when clarity hasn't arrived, and we judge that too quickly. But emotional clarity, like deep water, takes time to settle. The more you stir it, the murkier it gets. So give yourself grace, too. Let your feelings unfold without forcing them into language too soon. One of the most powerful moments in connection is when someone realizes, "You're not rushing me." And that moment builds something rare: safety. Because where there's patience, there's trust. And where there's trust, the truth begins to surface. So the next time you're tempted to fill a pause, stop. Let it be. Breathe. The space between words is where honesty often begins, and the ones who learn to wait, truly wait, are the ones who get to witness what's real. Every conversation leaves a footprint. Every reaction you had, every misunderstanding, every word you wish you'd said or taken back, it all leaves behind something you can learn from, but only if you look. Most people move on too quickly. We shrug off the awkward moments. We blame the other person. We assume it is what it is. But wisdom lives in the rewind, in press and pause, and asking yourself, what really happened there? I remember a time I clashed with someone I cared about. We both felt misunderstood, frustrated. The conversation ended badly, and for a while I blamed them. But later, in the quiet, I replayed it, not to punish myself, but to learn, and I saw it. The moment my tone shifted, the assumption I made too quickly, the way I didn't really listen, it didn't make the other person right or wrong, but it helped me understand my part. And that changed how I showed up next time. The Stoics believed that reflection isn't about shame. It's about refinement. They treated each moment, each interaction, as a lesson, not to dwell in the past, but to evolve for the future. You don't have to overanalyze everything, but there's power in asking simple questions after a difficult moment. Did I listen? Did I interrupt? Did I react or respond? One of the most useful questions I've ever asked myself is, if I could do that conversation over again, what would I change? Not out of guilt, but out of growth. Because the truth is, we all carry patterns, ways we defend, ways we avoid, ways we project old wounds onto new people. But if you don't reflect, you repeat. You walk into the same conversation with different names and faces, but the same mistakes. And that's where reflection becomes freedom. It gives you a choice. You start to notice, when I raise my voice, it's usually because I don't feel heard. When I shut down, it's often because I'm scared of being rejected. When I try to fix others, it's really because I feel helpless with my own pain. And that kind of honesty, it's where transformation begins. It also helps you see others differently. When you've taken time to understand your own reactions, you become more generous with theirs. You stop assuming the worst. You give more room for nuance. And sometimes, that makes all the difference. I once had a team project fall apart. Tension, miscommunication, pride. It all boiled over. But afterward, instead of walking away angry, I reached out and said, I think we both missed things. Can we unpack this so we do better next time? That conversation didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. And the next project went smoother, with more trust, more clarity. Learning from past interactions doesn't mean dwelling in regret. It means letting your past shape your present with more wisdom. The Stoics saw every experience as training, every mistake as material, and every moment as practice for the next. So don't waste the lessons life already gave you. They cost time, emotion, sometimes pain. Make it count. Ask yourself, often, what patterns am I carrying? What lessons am I resisting? What wisdom is hidden in that uncomfortable moment? Because the person who learns from the past doesn't just get better at conversations, they get better at living. You've just walked through 10 lenses, 10 quiet shifts that change the way we see people, the way we listen, the way we connect. From decoding body language, to catching micro-expressions, to listening without interrupting, to reflecting without blame. Each step brought you closer, not just to others, but to yourself. And maybe now, you see what was always there. Connection isn't about saying the perfect thing. It's about being present enough to hear what's real. So here's the reflection I leave you with. What would your relationships look like? If you slowed down just enough to truly understand before you responded, if this journey moved something in you, I invite you to stay, subscribe, leave a comment. Not for numbers, but because the kind of reflection we're building here needs more people like you. And as you step back into your daily life, remember this. Clarity isn't loud. It's patient. It's quiet. It's consistent. And it's always worth the wait. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.